There was a time in East Africa where one name ruled the retail world, Nakumatt. It was more than just a place to shop. It was a symbol of modern convenience, variety, and regional economic ambitions. From its humble beginnings as a small mattress store in Nakuru, Nakumatt rapidly grew into one of the most recognizable supermarket chains across Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda. With its signature blue branding and a promise of "you need it, we've got it," Nakumatt became a household, offering everything from groceries to electronics under one roof. But behind the bright lights and well-stocked shelves, business was teetering on the edge. Rapid expansion, mismanagement, and poor financial controls led to a crippling debt burden that reportedly exceeded $330 million. Suppliers went unpaid, shelves began to empty, and customers lost confidence. Landlords, fed up with the rent arrears, began evicting the chain from prime locations, further accelerating its downfall. Failed attempts at restructuring, including a short-lived partnership with an investor, only delayed the inevitable. By 2017, Nakumatt's empire had crumbled, leaving behind shattered stores and thousands of job losses. Welcome to the rise and the unforgettable fall of Nakumatt Supermarket. But before we continue, if you're into storytelling and eager to learn new things, then this channel is definitely for you. Make sure to like and subscribe for more captivating stories. The story of Nakumatt begins in 1947 when Mangalal Shah migrated from India to Kenya. He established a small shop in Embakasi, Nairobi, catering to quarry workers. Seeking better opportunities, he moved to Kisumu, then to Elbagon, and finally settled in Nakuru in 1965. There, he opened Vimal Fancy Store, named after his son, selling clothing items. The business thrived, leading to the opening of Tiku Fancy Store in 1972, named after his daughter. However, in 1975, Mangalal ventured into exporting clothing to Uganda, often on credit. This move backfired when many clients defaulted, leading to debts amounting to 1.2 million Kenyan shillings. Consequently, he declared bankruptcy and closed his shops. During this challenging period, Mangalal worked for his brother, Hasmu Shah, at Nakuru Mattresses, a shop specializing in mattresses. Meanwhile, his sons, Atul and Vimal Shah, started a small venture named Farmats, stitching and selling bed sheets. The business benefited from the 1978 coffee boom in East Africa, which increased disposable incomes among farmers, boosting sales. With the profits, the Shah family managed to repay their debts and eventually purchased Nakuru Mattresses from Ashmu, merging it with the Farmats. In 1987, Atul Shah officially founded Nakumatt Holdings Limited, with the name Nakumatt coming from Nakuru Mattresses. The company began expanding beyond Nakuru, opening its first store outside the town in Eldoret in 1984, followed by a Nairobi branch in 1986. The Shah family diversified their product range beyond mattresses and clothing to include household items like sufurias, umbrellas, and plastic basins. As the 1980s rolled into the 1990s, Kenya was changing. Cities were growing, and the middle class was rising. People wanted more than cramped corner shops. They wanted space, variety, and convenience. Atul Shah saw a shift and made a move. He envisioned a retail revolution, a modern supermarket like the ones he had read about abroad, with shopping carts, air conditioning, clean floors, and shelves stocked with everything. In 1992, that vision became real with the launch of Nakumatt Mega Mall in Nairobi. It wasn't just a store, it was a retail marvel. It opened 24 hours a day, something unheard of in East Africa. Customers flocked in. They could buy groceries, electronics, clothes, and even imported things, all under one roof. Nakumatt wasn't just a shop, it was an experience. What followed was a wave. From Nairobi to Mombasa, Kisumu to Eldoret, Nakumatt stores sprang up like wildfire. By the early 2000s, Nakumatt had become a household name. Its blue and white branding dotted city skylines, and families proudly flashed their smart cards, loyalty cards that made shoppers feel part of something exclusive. Atul Shah was now the face of the retail empire, but he wasn't done. With Kenya conquered, Nakumatt turned its eyes to the region. In 2008, a new store opened in Kigali, Rwanda. The following year, Nakumatt landed in Kampala with flair, then bought out Pele supermarkets, grabbing prime locations overnight. It also landed in Tanzania in 2011, first in Moshi, then in a bold move, Nakumatt acquired 3 stores from ShopRite, a South African giant, pulling out of the market. By 2015, Nakumatt was in 4 countries, with over 65 stores, more than 5,500 employees, and revenues over $450 million. Nakumatt became the Walmart of East Africa, a comparison it proudly embraced. People loved Nakumatt. It was where they bought their first TVs, fridges, and even laptops. It was where kids dragged parents to get toys, where couples shopped for their first home. It was reliable, clean, and aspirational. Now, let's dive into the unseen structure that ultimately brought the empire crashing down. Nakumatt's ownership structure was its most defining and ultimately most limiting characteristics. It was entirely family-owned, run like a private family asset rather than a modern retail corporation. Atul Shah, the founder and CEO, owned majority stake, with shares spread among close family members. This included his son, Noel Shah, and other extended family who held critical managerial roles. The ownership structure was opaque, no shareholder accountability beyond the family. Because the family had full control, there was no need to disclose financials publicly, and they were not subjected to the kind of oversight that listed or externally financed company faces. There was no professional or independent board to guide or challenge strategy. Decisions were made at the top, often by Atul Shah alone. Offers from investors or partners were often declined or ignored. Atul Shah believed that bringing in outsiders meant losing control or diluting the vision. Senior management positions were largely occupied by family members and loyalists, not professionals with retail, financial, or supply chain expertise. This structure, while enabling fast decisions and loyalty-driven management, it created a closed loop where bad ideas went unchanged and poor financial practices persisted unchecked. Atul Shah was the final decision maker and chief visionary. This kind of centralized leadership works in startups or small businesses, but not in corporations operating across multiple countries and employing thousands. All major expenditure, store openings, supplier negotiation and strategic decisions had to be approved by Atul Shah. Even routine operations like promotions, stock clearance, or budget adjustments were held up awaiting high-level approval. This led to bottlenecks and slow decision-making, especially when the chain expanded across East Africa. Accounting systems were outdated, often manual. Many managers operated without real-time view of cash flows, inventory, or liabilities. Stock and supply chain management was done with little technological integration. There was no automated way to track product movement across 60+ stores. HR policies were informal. Promotions were based on loyalty. Many senior staff members lacked retail or logistics training. Nakumatt's management style heavily relied on fast supply credit. They took stock on credit and often pay months later. Second is bank loans. Expansion was funded through aggressive borrowing without proper analysis, ROI, or break-even points. This was unsustainable, yet the family continued to push for more store openings, even in regions where the brand had little footprint or brand awareness, for example, Rwanda and Tanzania. Also, unlike global and regional chains, Nakumatt had no external investors, no venture capital, no strategic partners, and no private equity. Institutional investors bring more than capital, they bring governance, structure, and performance accountability. Investors often demand audited accounts, strategic reviews, and financial discipline. A partner like Shoprite, Massmart, or Carrefour will insist on financial controls, professional management, market research before expansion, and integrated supply chain systems. Nakumatt had none of that. During Nakumatt's peak, multiple firms, both local and foreign, reportedly expressed interest in investing or partnering, but Atul Shah resisted. This refusal meant Nakumatt couldn't access emergency capital during its crisis years that partners might have brought. In the end, Nakumatt was isolated financially and operationally. By 2016, customers began to notice empty shelves in Nakumatt outlets, an ominous sign for a retailer once known for its wide range of stock and convenience. This wasn't a case of poor inventory control, it was a symptomatic of much bigger issue, strained supplier relationships. Nakumatt had accumulated massive debts with its suppliers. Some reportedly owed hundreds of millions of shillings. As a result, suppliers began withholding deliveries until they were paid. Even fast-moving consumer goods like Unilever and P&G reduced or stopped supplying products due to non-payment. This led to stock out of essential goods like milk, sugar, and detergents, which deeply eroded customers' confidence. In some stores, power and water were disconnected over unpaid utility bills. As these operational cracks widened, loyal customers began shifting to competitors like Tuskys, Naivas, and Carrefour, compounding Nakumatt's cash flow woes. At the core of Nakumatt's eviction woes was unpaid rent. Reports indicated that the supermarket chain owed hundreds of millions of shillings in outstanding rent to landlords, often stretching over several months. The company failed to meet with the terms of its lease agreements, which stipulated timely rental payments, leading to growing tensions with the landlords. In some instances, Nakumatt's rent had accrued to the point where they were no longer able to negotiate payment schedules or extensions. As the debt accumulated, landlords became more aggressive, seeking legal resources to reclaim properties. Many landlords were unable to continue with Nakumatt as a tenant due to the massive outstanding rents. Some took matters into their own hands by filing eviction notice. Nakumatt, at this point, had already started scaling back operations, with certain stores closed or operation reduced. In early 2017, for example, Nakumatt was evicted from the Prestige Mall in Nairobi after failing to pay rent for several months. Another key location, Westgate Mall in Nairobi, faced similar fate. Nakumatt also faced eviction in multiple locations along Mombasa Road, a major highway in Nairobi. Nakumatt's financial structure was built on unsustainable borrowing. Rather than growing organically or raising equity, the retailer heavily relied on short-term loans to fund operations and expansion. At its peak, Nakumatt's debt was estimated to be over 30 billion Kenyan shillings. There were also allegations of financial mismanagement within the company. Funds intended for operations or supply payments were allegedly misappropriated or redirected to support the personal interest of the owners. According to some reports, cash collected at the tills never made it to the bank in full, raising concerns about internal accountability and governance. The financial opacity made it hard for investors and partners to step in. Attempts to attract strategic investors failed largely because potential suitors couldn't get clear, audited financials. Perhaps the most critical blow came from aggressive overexpansion. Nakumatt grew rapidly across Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and Tanzania. However, this growth was not supported by a corresponding investment in logistics, human capital, or IT infrastructure. New branches were often launched without proper studies, leading to stores that were unprofitable from day one. In addition, the company imported most of its goods, exposing it to foreign exchange risks and logistical delays. Each new branch meant new rental obligations, additional staffs, and higher working capital needs. But instead of pulling back, Nakumatt doubled down, borrowing more money to open even more stores. This expansion model worked while cash flow was strong, but once suppliers pulled back and sales dropped, the entire system began to collapse like a house of cards. As Nakumatt financial troubles escalated, Between 2016 and 2018, one of the first visible impacts was on its workforce. The company had employed over 6,000 people at its peak, including store clerks, manager, logistics personnel, and the head of office staffs across East Africa. By early 2017, with stores closing, Nakumatt began laying off staff. Initially, the layoffs were unofficial. Workers were sent home due to store closures and later informed that they had been terminated. Many employees reported going months without pay before being let go. There were multiple complaints of delayed or unpaid salaries, no formal termination letters, and no remittance of statutory deductions such as NSSF or NHIF, despite the deductions being made from their salaries. By late 2017, more than 75% of the workforce had been laid off, and the few remaining employees were retained on short-term or part-time terms in few operational branches. As the layoffs grew, former employees filed lawsuits seeking compensation and unpaid dues. Many of these cases dragged on due to the company's insolvency status and administrative process. As Nakumatt spiraled into crisis, there were multiple attempts to rescue or restructure the business. These efforts were led by the company's directors, creditors, and later a court-appointed administrator. In January 2018, Nakumatt was placed under voluntary administration following a court ruling. Peter Kahi of PKF Consulting was appointed as the administrator under Kenya's Insolvency Act. Kahi took over after most of Nakumatt's assets were already depleted, with over 30 billion Kenyan shillings in liabilities and only a handful of operational outlets. The administrator worked with creditors to evaluate options such as capital injections, restructuring, or asset sales. In late 2018, Nakumatt proposed a company voluntary arrangement, a legally binding agreement between Nakumatt and its unsecured creditors to restructure debt, allow the company to continue operating a few profitable branches, and repay creditors over time through proceeds from ongoing operations. The company voluntary arrangement was approved by a majority of unsecured creditors in January 2019. However, it failed to gain traction because the company had very little revenue to support repayments. Key landlords and banks did not back the agreement, suppliers refused to resume deliveries, and the brand reputation was too damaged to recover customer trust. In 2017, Nakumatt entered into a merger talks with Nakumatt Supermarket, another major Kenyan retailer. The idea was that Tuskys would inject working capital, help stabilize Nakumatt operations, and integrate some Nakumatt stores into Tuskys' network. While Tuskys did temporarily provide logistical support and help restock a few branches, the merger fell apart due to regulatory concerns, Tuskys' own financial limitations, and disagreements over governance and ownership structure. Tuskys later faced its own financial problems and could no longer assist Nakumatt. By 2019, Nakumatt was no longer a viable business. It had only a few non-performing branches left. Most of its assets had been auctioned off, and creditors were pushing for a complete shutdown. On January 7, 2020, the High Court in Nairobi officially ordered the liquidation of Nakumatt Holding Limited, marking the end of any restructuring attempts. The judge ruled that the company had no realistic path to recovery and instructed the administrator to begin winding up proceedings. At liquidation, Nakumatt had no active branches, minimal stock or infrastructure, and debt estimated at 30 billion Kenyan shillings. Nakumatt's story stands today as a cautionary tale in East Africa corporate history. Thanks for watching. I'll see you